seconds. Hello, and welcome to FACT's webinar, How Soil Health and Plant Diversity Influences Animal and Human Health. Our guest presenter is Alan Williams. I am Samantha Gasson, FACT's Humane Farming Program Manager, and I will be moderating this session. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization headquartered in Illinois that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcernstrust.org to learn more about our farmer services. At this time, I am so happy to introduce Dr. Alan Williams. He is an amazing person. He is a sixth-generation family farmer, a founding partner of Grass-Fed Insights, LLC, Understanding Ag, LLC, and the Soil Health Academy. He's pioneered many of the early regenerative grazing protocols and forage finishing techniques, and now teaches those practices and principles to farmers globally. He is a recovering academic, I love that, has served 15 years on the faculty at Louisiana Tech University and Mississippi State University. He holds a BS and an MS in animal science from Clemson University and a PhD in livestock genetics from LSU. He has authored more than 400 scientific and popular press articles. He is an invited speaker at regional, national, and international conferences and symposia. And you, I'm sure, will recognize Alan from our mRNA webinar last autumn. We are very lucky to have Alan with us today to share his experience and expertise. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to you, Alan. Thank you so much, and please take it away.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and great to be here again. I'm going to do a share screen here and get some slides up. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the connection today between soil health, plant species diversity, and its impact on animal and human health. And make no mistake about it, it does have a very big impact on animal and human health. So first, well, there we go. Okay. So first, I just want to share a little bit with you about who we are. So my partners and I founded basically three companies, Understanding Ag, which is a regenerative ag consulting company, the Soil Health Academy, which is our educational arm. So we teach soil health academies and all of that all over the US and many other countries. And then our third company, is called Regenified. And Regenified is our regenerative verification company, but we also do regenerative foods and fiber aggregation. We are comprised of real life farmers and ranchers. So I'm a farmer and a rancher myself, as well as being a former university researcher and educator. We have consulted with thousands of farmers and ranchers, both in the US and globally. We've also worked with a whole host of food and fiber companies. We have full-time consulting staff in the US, Canada, Mexico, and the UK. And have consulted in 45 plus countries in more than 50 states. And currently in the US, we're working across about 34 million plus acres that are under regenerative management. Okay, it's been a little slow here. There we go. So you got to have a definition for regenerative agriculture, and we define it like this. It is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem functions, starting with life within the soil and expanding to life above. And there's a quote that I love to use, and that quote is by W.C. Loudermilk, and it goes like this: "The land does not lie. It bears a record of what men write on it, a record that is easy to read by those who understand the simple language of the land." So it simply means that whatever we do, our management is written on the tapestry of the land, good or bad. For us, this is what it's all about. It's about how can we create more life in every form and facet. And it's also about how can we restore a fully functioning carbon cycle. And all of this matters relative to animal health and human health. And what we have clearly found is that as we move along the continuum from what we would call continuous grazing to regenerative or adaptive grazing, we begin to see life explode, starting with life within the soil and then expanding to life above. So what I want to do to start off with is I want to walk you through 3 very different regions of North America and share with you some of our work and some of the things that we have found through the practical and intentional application of regenerative principles and practices. And then I'm going to finish up today with the phytonutrient research that we've been doing to tie all of this together. So first, let's go to the Central Valley of California. Now, unfortunately, the pictures that you see here are pictures that we can take far too often in the Central Valley. These are typical almond and walnut orchards. You see that there's a lot of bare ground. It looks more like a desert than they do orchards. They're taught to do it this way because they're told that if they have anything growing up underneath these trees, that's going to rob the trees of moisture and nutrients. And this is one of the typical university research orchards, and it doesn't look much different. There's still a lot of bare exposed ground. Now, the group that you see out there is our is one of our soil health academies. And we had taken them out here to see a university orchard, and we tried to dig in the soil to do a shovel test and found out it really takes a pickaxe. The soil was just so heavily plated and compacted. Stuck an infiltration ring in the ground and found that, it took more than 2 hours for water to infiltrate. And we found out that they were spraying this orchard an average of 12 to 15 times a year with some type of pesticide. So can you do it differently than this? And the answer is yes. So this is a regenerative orchard in that same Central Valley. This orchard happens to be owned by a gentleman by the name of Daniel Unruh. And Daniel came to a Soil Health Academy, his first academy in 2018, and radically altered the way that he was doing things. His orchard looked like everybody else's at that point in time, and he was having all kinds of problems. Health of his trees, health of his nut, productivity problems. He had a serious nematode problem. But when he came to the academy, he decided to radically alter the way that he was doing things. So one of the first things he did was he planted a highly diverse and complex cover crop. And he started to see some radical shifts in things rather quickly. His nematode problem absolutely disappeared. And what he discovered was some of the plant species in the cover crop contained natural nematicides that actually did a whole lot better job than the synthetic nematicides that he had been applying prior. He then also added sheep to these same orchards. And he's running up to 1,000 head of sheep through these orchards on an annual basis, controlled by a single strand of polywire and moved daily. This not only helps to supply biology and fertility to the orchard, but they also are a second revenue stream off of the exact same acres. So now he's making income not just off of the walnuts, but off the sheep. He's also more recently added beehives and is producing and selling a lot of honey. So he's added multiple revenue streams to the exact same acres that he didn't have before. Now, what is the result of this? Well, he has had a significant reduction in his reliance on irrigation and any kind of pesticide use. The sheep are now supplying his fertility, so he's not having to buy and apply synthetic nitrogen and other fertilizers. And both his trees and his nut crop are far healthier, a much more dense and rich phytonutrient profile. And he has radically shifted the way that he markets his nut crop now. He used to sell to one of the large commodity companies, and now he does direct marketing because of the health of his orchard and the health of the nuts. And he's also producing value-added products like walnut oil. So he's been able to derive a lot more sources of revenue or income off of the exact same acres versus what he was doing before. And everything functions much better while he has significantly reduced his input cost and increased his net revenue. This is another orchard, the Burris family. They're in the same Central Valley. This April, now Daniel, the orchard I just showed you, has hosted some soil health academies since he attended his first one. And now the Burris family will be hosting a soil health academy here in late April at their orchard in the Central Valley. So we're really looking forward to that. And they're doing very similar things to what Daniel is doing and seeing the same beneficial results. Now let's go to the second place in North America. This is the Chihuahuan Desert of Mexico, and it actually extends from portions of New Mexico and southwestern Texas and down into Mexico, particularly in the state of Chihuahua, but also the state of Coahuila. So the Chihuahuan Desert, this is sort of a typical scenario. You can drive for mile after mile after mile in the Chihuahuan Desert, and this is what you'll see. So a lot of these ranches down there take 200 to 300 acres to support a single cow. And from this picture, you can see why. But was this always a desert that looked like this? And the answer is no, it was not. This is absolutely a man-made desert and is much more recent in that regard. For instance, let me show you the second picture that displays some what we call historical ecological context. That same ranch that you just saw in the first picture, this picture was also taken on that ranch in 1865. This is a band of Apache warriors. And you don't see any bare exposed soil here. You see knee-deep grass. There were lots of bison, lots of elk, lots of deer, lots of antelope. And oh, by the way, lots of beaver and otter. Do you think you find any beaver and otter in that desert now? I don't think so. They got to have water to support them. But this shows you what this desert, or what we now call the Chihuahuan Desert, once looked like. But now we are turning it back into that sea of grass. So this is the same desert, the Chihuahuan Desert, and you can see that, you know, you can radically alter this landscape. So in all we're using as tools to do this are livestock movement, temporary fencing and herding, and water for the livestock. We're planting no seed, applying no fertilizer, using no chemicals, using no mechanical methods, and using no irrigation. So there's no irrigation here. All right. So don't think we grew this grass because all of a sudden we applied irrigation. No, not at all. This grew from the latent seed bank as a result of implementing regenerative principles and practices and adaptive grazing. So let me show you some time-lapsed photographs from a particular ranch, and we're working with quite a few ranches down there, but this is one particular ranch that I just want to use as an example to show the pace of progress. So this first picture was taken in 2015 on the Las Damas Ranch. And this is after a couple of years of implementation of adaptive grazing. You can see that there's been some improvement compared to the first picture I showed you, but there's still a lot of bare exposed soil. By 2018, you see significant progress. And what we have discovered is that there is a definitive timeline here that as we build the biological profile in the soil, and that's what it takes first. We first have to build the biological profile in the soil. Then that results in far greater plant species diversity expressing itself. And then once we've built this to a certain critical biomass, we go from linear progress to exponential progress. So the first two pictures showed linear progress, but the third picture shows the exponential progress. So this is profoundly different. And this no longer looks like a desert at all. And we have experienced this over and over and over again, just like in Daniel Unruh's walnut orchard, just like here in the Chihuahuan Desert. Now let me take you, well, first, let me show you what has happened on the Las Damas Ranch during that time period. So they have improved their net profits, not gross profits, but net profits more than 350%, while growing 4.5 times more plant biomass and being able to add 2.5 times more livestock numbers to the ranch. And we have also noted an explosion in wildlife, including threatened and endangered bird species. So these birds have found the habitat that they need and have now made a home on these regenerative ranches and are once again surviving and thriving in that environment. So now let's go to a third different region of North America. Let's go to the southeastern US. And what I'm going to show you now are the results of studies that we did in multiple states in the southeastern US, looking at neighboring farms, with one farm operating regeneratively and the other operating conventionally, the way that they had been operating. We assembled an entire team of scientists, so I was part of this science team, and we measured a whole host of things from beneath the soil surface to above. And let me share with you some of the key data that we discovered in this paired comparison between regenerative farms and conventional farms in the states of Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So first, we measured greenhouse gas fluxes and soil carbon. And so we deployed eddy covariance flux towers to measure 24/7, 365 the flux of greenhouse gases. Now, this would have included carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. We also did soil measurements of carbon as well. What we found was that the regenerative farms were a 4 times more powerful carbon sink than the conventional farms, drawing down an average of 12.1 tons per hectare per year of CO2 equivalent, compared to just 2.9 tons per hectare per year for the conventional farms. Now, the good news is that the conventional grazers were still drawing down, greenhouse gases. But as we said, the regenerative farms were doing this far better and far more effectively and efficiently. Again, 4 times more powerful carbon sink. We noted that there were 3 times more grassland birds living on the regenerative farms compared to their conventional neighbors. And these were direct next door neighbors. So what was keeping the birds from living on the neighbor's farm? Nothing other than lack of habitat. So the birds knew where the better habitat was, and that's where they were congregating. So in bird counts, there was an average of 442 birds of 9 species on the regenerative farms compared to 152 birds of 6 species on the conventional. We also noted 33% more insect species diversity, beneficial insects and pollinators, bees, butterflies, and all of that on the regenerative farms, and 25% more microbial diversity in the soil. So all of life was better and was expressing itself better on the regenerative farms compared to the conventional. And in terms of what we call effective rainfall, the amount of rainfall that we actually capture and keep in the soil, we found that the regenerative farms were on average a 2.3 times more powerful rainfall infiltrator on a per acre per hour basis compared to the conventional farms. So every hour of rainfall infiltration, the regenerative farms were infiltrating 2 more inches of rain. Now, In reality, what does that mean? Well, that means that the regenerative farms, every hour of water infiltration, were accumulating and storing 54,000 gallons more water per acre compared to the conventional neighbors. That's a lot of water, and that makes a major difference whether you're talking about flood conditions or drought conditions. This helps mitigate both. So those are three very different regions of North America. I just wanted to give you sort of a brief snapshot of what has been happening when we intentionally apply regenerative principles and practices. I have so much more that I could show and share with you, but for the sake of time today that we have allotted for this webinar, I want to dive now into what happens when we do this on the ground, what happens in terms of phytonutrient profile of the plants that are growing there. So ultimately, it's all about this. It's about the nutrient density of the foods that we are consuming. And you have macronutrients, the things that most people think about, proteins, fats, and carbs, but that's just a tiny fraction of nutritional value of food. And unfortunately, on what are called nutritional panels on the back of food products, and I'm going to argue that that's a misnomer. That is not a nutritional panel because all it lists are proteins, fats, and carbs. And that can be incredibly misleading in terms of nutritional value of that food. What we're looking at are the micronutrients and the phytonutrients. So the vitamins, the minerals, the fatty acids, and then the phenolics, the terpenes, the alkaloids, carotenoids, and so forth. All of these things that matter hugely to the health of our animals, our livestock, and our wildlife, and to our health. So what we know from quite a bit of research now is that we have seen significant loss in nutrient density in almost every food that we consume. It has been this way for decades now. Since, the 1930s and 40s on, we have seen food nutrient density and value steadily declining. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about vegetables, fruits, herbs, grains, or our animal proteins. Nutrient value has declined in all of those. So what we have done is participated with a whole team of scientists led by Dr. Stefan Van Vliet and Dr. Fred Provenza to study critical phytonutrients in foods using an analysis called metabolomic analysis. And phytonutrient compounds are compounds that have very powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects in both animals and humans. So they help play a key role in the prevention and management of many, many chronic diseases that we now experience as a population. So these phytonutrients are critically important to our health and the health of the animals that we're raising. And the richer the phytonutrient content can be, the healthier we're all going to be. So what we have done is conducted research in nutrition that has gone far and beyond any other nutritional research ever done. The typical nutritional research starts with the end product, whatever we're eating, and just analyzes that, and then maybe does a survey of how it might have been produced. And that's it. We went far beyond that. We're measuring the soils for chemical, physical, and biological characteristics where all of these foods are produced. We're measuring the plants that the animals are eating when we're producing animal proteins. We're measuring the fecal matter and the phytonutrients in the fecal matter of these animals. And we're measuring the end product, the beef, the eggs, the poultry, the pork, and so forth. And then finally, conducting human clinical trials. So again, this is by far the most comprehensive analysis ever done. And it is producing some profound and almost shocking results. So first and foremost, we are finding, as you see from this graph, that even among those that are doing pastured protein production, there are definitive differences. So the healthier the soil and the more diverse their pastures are, even if they're all still doing pasture raised and grass fed, you're going to see differences in phytonutrient profile. So you see from the bar graph here, so there was a farm in Alabama, a couple of farms represented here from North Carolina that were doing pastured protein production, grass-fed beef and pastured poultry and pork and things like that. And you see that all of them were significantly higher than the feedlot measures, okay, which you see on the far end of the graph, the far right, with bars that barely get above the axis. So you can see how poor the feedlot rations were in phytonutrient profile. I mean, pretty much not there. So you can see that all the pasture raised was better, but yet there were also definitive differences in the pasture raised. And the two keys there in those differences were, number one, richer biological diversity and profile in the microbes in the soil, and number two, greater plant species diversity growing in those fields and pastures that the animals could eat. So this is direct evidence that as we build that soil biology, not chemistry, folks, okay? And I want to really make that clear. We're talking about building soil biology, not fertilizing this in. You're not going to fertilize this in, okay? And I'm sure I'll have questions on that, and I'll very happily answer those. But you're not going to do this with fertilizer, okay? You're going to do this through intentional application of the principles of regenerative agriculture. And so, again, building soil microbial diversity and profile and building plant species diversity is the principal thing that does this. And here we see that if we look at total plant, secondary metabolites, which are these phytonutrients, you see that corn only contains very few, and this is your typical commodity corn, of course, and a corn-based total mixed ration that's typically fed in feedlots or in commercial dairies, commercial swine production, commercial poultry production, very, very low. And it's only in the forage, the fresh forage samples, that we see these beginning to increase rapidly. And here you see that, again, comparing, several key phytonutrients from feedlot produced beef to pasture-raised beef, grass-fed beef, again, definitively better in each of these key phytonutrients in the pasture-raised beef compared to the feedlot or grain-fed beef. And if we look at soil-produced metabolites or phytonutrients, again, significantly better in the pasture-raised versus the feedlot produced. And then if we look at elements in the soil organic matter was much higher in the regeneratively managed pastures versus the conventional cornfields. Total exchange capacity, CEC, was better. Zinc was higher. Iron was higher. Phosphorus was higher. Potassium was higher. Okay, now understand this. These pastures were not being fertilized, but the cornfields were. They were applying copious amounts of synthetic fertility and manure to the cornfield, and the only fertility applied to the pastures was what was dropping straight out of the rear ends of the animals grazing there. Nothing else applied. So in spite of all of that fertility application in the cornfields, you did not see the same results in elements and soil organic matter improvement compared to the pastures where we just use regenerative principles and practices only. And then again, if we look at vitamin A and E in the meat from the pasture raised versus the feedlot, we see that they were significantly higher in the pasture raised versus the feedlot, in spite of the fact that in the feedlot, they were adding supplementary vitamins A and E into the feedlot ration. And in the pasture, there was no supplementary vitamin or mineral feeding. Okay. So even with supplementary feeding, they still didn't have the same levels of vitamins and minerals compared to the animals raised on pasture. And if we look at oxidative stress, so the lower, the better here. So if we look at indicators of oxidative stress, real stress on those animals that can lead to inflammation and a whole host of disease disorders, we see that the feedlot animals exhibited a much higher level of oxidative stress compared to the animals on pasture. So let's look at some real life examples from grass-fed beef compared to typical feedlot grain-fed beef. And let's look at key phytonutrients here. Okay, now this is sort of an aggregate of multiple grass-fed beef producers compared to feedlot production. Now, what I do want to say here is that when we got to the very best grass-fed producers that had the best soil health and the greatest plant species diversity, these numbers were even more dramatically different compared to the feedlot beef. But this is on average. So the grass-fed beef on average, if we look across, and I'm not going to call the names of all of these phytonutrients, they're pretty difficult to pronounce. But if we look across here, 57% higher, 65% higher, 59% higher, 85% higher, so on and so forth. So across the board, higher, 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 higher in the pasture-raised or grass-fed beef. If we look at key vitamins, vitamin E was 64% higher, vitamin A, 34% higher, vitamin C, even though we don't consider beef a good form of vitamin C, still 33% more vitamin C in the grass-fed beef versus the grain-fed. Vitamin B3 or niacin, 25% higher. Vitamin B6, 27% higher. And then if we look at our favorable fatty acids, we find that, again, across the board, whether it's EPA, ALA, which are all forms of omega-3s, significantly higher in the grass-fed versus grain-fed beef. The heptadecanoic acid, which helps lower the risk of cardiometabolic disease, was significantly higher. The CLAs, the conjugated linoleic acids that we find so prevalently in grass-fed beef that have anti-cancer and anti-obesity properties, 75% higher on average. And the omega-6 to 3 ratio was significantly lower, which is what you want. Omega-6s, if they're out of proportion in our bodies, cause significant inflammation in our bodies, which then leads to diseases, maladies, and disorders. So we want a low omega-6 to 3 ratio. And we found that our average grass-fed beef in this study had a ratio, omega-6 to 3 ratio, under a 2-to-1, compared to anywhere from an 11-to-1 to over 50-to-1 in feedlot beef. And then if we look at oxidative stress markers and all of that, we find that in the ones that we want to be lower, like homocysteine and all of that, and 4-HNE, they were lower. In the ones that we need to be higher to produce metabolic health and better cardiovascular health, they were higher. So again, we're seeing very positive results here. Now let's go to one more sector. Let's go to the dairy sector. So we analyze milk, okay, from dairies that were producing grass-fed milk to dairies that were producing conventional milk. And in terms of total phenols, again, the total phytochemical array, we found that in the very best dairy grazers, that they were averaging 257% more total phenolic compounds or phytonutrients compared to the conventional TMR dairy ration. And on average, across all the grass-fed dairies, they were averaging 151% higher phytonutrient richness. In terms of antioxidants, the best dairies were averaging 200% higher. In terms of phenolic compounds that impact heart disease, diabetes, and cancer in a positive manner, in the very best dairies, they were 420% higher, and then in the grass-fed dairies as a whole, 253% higher on average. For antioxidant, anti-inflammatory compounds, the very best dairy grazers were 600% higher and 330% higher for the grass-fed dairies as a whole. And then for human health and immune system strength, the very best grass-fed dairies were 172% higher, and the grass-fed dairies on whole were 40% higher. And then again, as we look at favorable fatty acids, we find that the omega-6 to 3 ratio, which we want to be lower, was 260% lower in the best dairies and 133% lower on average for the grass-fed. Total omega-3s was significantly higher, as you can see. Total omega-6s significantly lower. And then if we look at other fatty acids like C15, C20, C22, which positively influence brain and heart health, again, we found that the grass-fed dairies were significantly higher compared to the TMR, and that in CLA production, that again has positive impacts on cancer and obesity, significantly higher. So this data is not even arguable anymore. We have done this so much and are continuing to do this. There's going to be a lot of peer-reviewed studies coming out this year on this, and more are going to follow. So the data is rather staggering. And I can tell you that as we share this with the consumer population, they are immediately reacting and responding to this. So this is something that has had a very positive impact on the consumer. And they are absolutely telling us that we want these types of foods. And they're now asking us every day, I live here, I live there, where in the heck can I get this? So that pretty definitively proves the link between soil health, plant species diversity, and animal health and human health. There's no mistake about this anymore. This is a very, very real thing.
Wow, that was pretty impactful. I was taking screenshots and sending them to my husband. We always learn so much when you join us. It's absolutely fantastic. So while you guys are formulating your thoughts, we're going to go ahead and take questions. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and start our end of webinar poll. This is really, really helpful for us as we move forward. Trying to get funding and all that other kind of stuff. So if you wouldn't mind answering that, that'd be fantastic. Alan, we already have a couple of questions, but just as a reminder, if you guys wouldn't mind putting your questions in the Q&A rather than in the chat. I actually have a couple of questions as well, but I'll let other people ask theirs first before I jump in and ask mine. So Jerry asks, I'm a research geek. How/where should I search for scholarly literature about regenerative agriculture? Google doesn't yield much. And I think the study that you've just done would be actually very useful to have a link to that. If you can share that with me and I can share it with everybody afterwards, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so really, several places. We are continually sharing things on our website at understandingag.com. There are, and that's relative to both these studies and many others within regenerative agriculture, and we'll keep posting things. Understandingag.com, Regenified.com. We're going to be sharing more and more of these types of research results on Regenified.com. They can also go to rootsodeep.org, and there will be studies about adaptive grazing, regenerative grazing there that are peer-reviewed and published. There are quite a few regenerative studies that are published by Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who we've done a lot of collaboration with, and his foundation. It's called ecdysis.org, ECDYSIS, ecdysis.org. Okay. So those are some of the key places that you can find a lot of this research. And just on the phytonutrient stuff, be patient. Okay. We're getting it out. It's in the peer review process right now, or at least, the first initial trials. And like I said, this is ongoing. So in 2024, there'll be peer-reviewed research coming out, and we'll be posting it. So just keep looking, keep searching our website and our social media at understandingag.com, and we'll keep you posted on that. But those are the key places you can go right now to find this type of research.
Alan, could you please, the ecdysis.org, DECYSIS?
Ecdysis, so it's ECDYSIS.
ECDY. Okay. I'm trying to write these down so I can share them with everybody.
Yep.
And then it's
understandingag.com.
Okay.
And then rootsodeep.org. Yep.
Oh, .org. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So Jerry, that was a great question. It was actually a question I had. So thank you for that. This is a good question as well. Oh, I do want to say, now don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A, and we may not get to them if they're in the chat. And Cindy actually has a very good question in the chat, and I really want to answer it, but I'm going to go through the Q&A first. And I actually have a very similar question, Cindy. So I'm probably going to make sure it gets answered, but put it in the Q&A. So this person asks, do ensiled grass forages, I'm assuming that means silage? I don't know. What does ensiled mean? Is it silage?
Yep.
So do they still contain optimal levels of phytonutrients, even though they've been,
okay. So stored forages, whether it's a dry hay or an ensiled forage, if you have built in a strong phytonutrient profile while it was growing, then yes, you'll still have a strong phytonutrient profile in that stored forage. Will it be a little bit reduced from the fresh forage? Yes, it will, because it's a stored forage. But will it still be far richer in phytonutrient content than the stored forages or the grains or anything else that were produced conventionally? Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That was a good question. Christelle is asking, looking at these great numbers for beef, has any research been done on any other meat, which is actually what Cindy was asking about as well. And that was my question, about monogastrics, and not just other ruminants as well.
So the answer is yes. I mean, we're looking at all the species, beef, pork, poultry, lamb, so on, and looking at, many different grain products and vegetables and fruits and nuts and so forth. So this is ongoing, and we're doing, the research is being done in a wide array of food products, both protein and produce and specialty crop and so forth. So yes, and obviously more and more of this data will be coming out relative to that.
And this is just so important to have this information, because you could say, oh, well, grass-fed beef is better for you. But if you can say, yes, grass-fed beef is better for you, and here are the numbers, that is so much more impactful. So it's just fantastic that this research is happening.
And if anybody wants their products tested, okay, they just need to contact Regenified, okay, at regenified.com, and they will help guide them to, testing of phytonutrient profile in their products. So to help streamline that process, they can just go to regenified.com.
Okay. have another question. How might you go about regenerating pasture that has sat unused for 2 grazing seasons? No animal traffic, no fertilizer. How might you navigate weed issues and introduce new forage species?
Well, it sounds like it's already in perennial species, and it just sat there, so it's become a little dormant. So the very first thing you need to do is get livestock back on it. You know, but not grazed conventionally, that's not going to help you much. You've got to get those livestock back on it and graze it adaptively, meaning that, you're going to make frequent moves, either using herding or temporary fencing. You're going to use higher stock densities as needed. We have a whole deal called the rule of disruption that helps you to introduce planned purposeful disruptions to make rapid progress. And you can go to understandingag.com to read a lot more about that. It's called the 3 Rules of Adaptive Stewardship. And maybe at some point we do a webinar specifically discussing that. But it needs livestock back on it is what it needs, and grazed right, grazed adaptively. And if you can put multiple species on there, even better. It'll make even faster progress. So typically, especially if it's already a perennial pasture, there's not a need to go in and plant additional species to refresh it. As a matter of fact, sometimes that's not really going to work, and you're spending the money for very little return. Your far better return is, again, get the livestock back on it, grazed adaptively.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Jess asks, do you have any info/research on stomach parasite management for sheep on pasture?
Okay. So we actually have, if you'll go to understandingag.com and go to our resources page, and you click on that, and there's a whole host of things that we have there. You can access, it's called blogs from our experts. I've written an article there called Don't Let It Bug You, the 6 Steps to Parasite Control. Okay. But we have a whole host of other articles that you'll find interesting and informational, and podcasts, webinars, case studies, on and on. Now, that being said, specifically to answer your question, so, and we raise sheep as well as our other species, our cattle and everything else, and we don't deworm and don't need to. And the reason being is because, first of all, the way you manage and graze your sheep or any livestock species matters. Keep them moving, never let them graze too low. All of your parasites are always down low on the plant, never up high. And if you keep them moving, so they're never forced to graze low, they're not reinfesting themselves. Okay, so you're sort of breaking the parasite cycle. The other is quit using chemical dewormers, because chemical dewormers kill our dung beetles and a lot of other favorable insects and harm our earthworms and so forth. And dung beetles help to break the parasite cycle by rapidly breaking down a manure pad so that the eggs and the larvae can't survive in the manure to continue that replication cycle. So that's another thing that we can do. Another is select for natural genetic resistance. If you're just mass treating all your animals, stop it, because if you are, you're masking those that have resistance versus those that don't. And so if you quit the mass treatment, they'll reveal themselves. You'll see some animals in the same pasture, same flock, same herd, they're not impacted at all by internal parasites, whereas others are heavily impacted by them. So cull the ones that are impacted, just get them gone. Why would you select for them, or let them continue to reproduce? Just simply get them gone. Keep the ones that are showing they have natural genetic resistance. And then another thing that you can do is, mix cattle and sheep and goats together. Cattle and sheep and goats are dead-end hosts for each other's principal parasites. Okay. So that helps to break that parasite cycle as well. And then another thing you can do is greater plant species diversity. So as we have a lot more diversity out there, particularly in forbs in our pastures are very rich in medicinal compounds and antiparasitic compounds. So as our livestock are able to eat some of these forbs, they naturally deworm themselves. How do we think the deer do it, and the elk do it, and the antelope do it, and all of that? Nobody's putting out dewormers for them. They are eating 60 to 80 different plants a day and eating a lot of forbs that again contain natural anti-parasiticides. So this makes this really easy once we really do this, and it means we don't have to spend money on dewormers for our cattle, our sheep, or whatever. So we lower that input cost, we improve the performance, and everything's better.
And for those of you who have that favorite sheep who maybe is not the best or is more susceptible to parasites, dry lot them and keep them anyway. But don't breed them, don't use them as part of your herd, and don't let them in with the other part of the herd. So been there, done that. I mean, dry lotted them, kept them separate because I love them so much. And also goats and sheep obviously can't go together unless there's a ruminant in there, because they do share parasites. So just
Yep.
but
you can mix goat, sheep, and cattle.
Right.
Without any problem whatsoever. Absolutely.
Right. Yep. But just to keep in mind that they were sheep and goats
right
are more closely related than cows are.
Exactly, and both are highly susceptible to the barber pole worm. Yes.
And Christelle asks, what about horses? So they would be another species to add in, right, Alan?
Absolutely. We work with people that are adaptively grazing horses, and yes, you can do that. Okay, you can teach horses to live closer together and to live with each other and cooperate with each other. When they don't, really, that's a human-made problem. We created that behavior. Okay. I mean, look at wild horses. They run in tight mobs. Okay. And so our domesticated horses, if they're not wanting to stay together in a pasture, we made that problem, not the horses. We taught them bad behavior. But you can reteach them, and we've done that. And you can move them. Instead of using poly wire, we use poly tape, because the horses see that better than the poly wire and respect it better. But we have a lot of people that are moving horses every day from paddock to paddock to paddock. And again, the same thing, more highly diverse grazing, all of that, they naturally deworm themselves, and they perform better and they're healthier. You have virtually no founder, no colic, none of the typical issues that you might see in a more pampered horse. All of those problems go away.
So even if you have a horse that has a tendency to founder, and would you allow them to have unlimited grass? You wouldn't worry about them.
If you have a lot more plants. See, the reason they typically founder is because it's low diversity pasture and they're getting way too much protein in their diet. Okay. But when you have a far more diverse pasture, again, it's the same thing. It applies to founder. They will quit foundering. Sheep will quit having foot rot and foot scald. Okay. All of these problems go away that we think are just inherent, and we just can't avoid. Diversity matters. And if we build diversity and see why, it goes back to what I presented earlier. As we build diversity in the plant species, we're building diversity in the microbial species in the soil. We're getting far better nutrient cycling and soil function, and the soil is feeding the plants a much more mineral-rich diet, and therefore all this phytonutrient richness is far better in the plants, even in the same plants that they've been eating. And that's, again, self-medicating, self-deworming. So the colic, the founder, all of that goes away.
Wow. That's cool. I love it. All right. Grant asks, when envisioning wide-scale adoption of pastured livestock and available land base in the US, do you have a sense for what percentage of industrially produced livestock would be transferred to pasture contexts, could be transferred to pasture context, which is a question that we have internally at FACT a lot.
Well, and I've even written a paper on this, and that's available on our website as well. But here's the deal with that. There's a lot of very erroneous facts being bantered about out there. That, well, we can't produce all the beef and all the dairy and all the pork and poultry we need, on pasture. We got to do a good percentage, in the CAFO type situations. No, we don't. We could produce 100% of all of our beef, all of our dairy, everything that we consume right now, okay, on pasture within a matter of 2 to 3 years. No problem whatsoever. First of all of our beef cow herds are on pasture. Nobody's raising cow calf in a feedlot. Okay, that doesn't work. So when we talk about the national cow herd in beef, they're already on pasture. The calves go to the feedlot,
Mhm.
at some point after they're weaned for the grain finishing. Okay. But right now, we already have more than enough grass in the US to grass finish. Right now, if we wanted to in 2024, we could grass finish 50 million plus head. Do you know how many we finish right now annually? Under 30 million head.
Wow.
That's it. That's our total demand right now. So we could almost double that right now with no problem. And yes, I see the next question, even with today's increasingly colder weather. Absolutely. If you do it this way, why? Because we mitigate that. Okay. Managing regeneratively, we have far greater resilience in droughts and in floods than you do with conventional management. And we're going to, if we get more and more acres under this type of management, then the weather extremes are also mitigated. Okay.
Mhm.
So we got to understand that, and so the vast majority of pastures that are conventionally grazed in the US, and there's more than 250 million acres of that. Okay. The vast majority of pastures that are conventionally grazed right now are being grazed at less than 30% capacity. Okay. So we're missing 70+% of their potential of those pastures. So all we got to do is a better job of grazing, and we gain 70 more percent productivity out of existing pastures. All right. The second thing is, if we no longer are grain finishing in the feedlot, then we've got more than 30 million acres under corn production that we can immediately transition back into grass to grass finish. Okay. So this is a no-brainer. So again, the comments that, well, we can never transition all of it, there's not enough grass, not enough acres, is absolutely untrue. It is not even close to being true. And again, I've run the numbers. We've proven that to be completely erroneous.
All right, we are right at the top of the hour. If everyone's okay with us going a little bit over, Alan, would you be? I know you've got a tight schedule today. Could you
I
go
can go
maybe
5,
5 minutes
but I got
over?
to get back to my workshop. Yep.
Okay. All right. So Michael has a very practical question. What's the best place to find plant diversity mixes that work well in one's region? He's in cold northern Wisconsin, so I would assume Cooperative Extension or your land grant university.
Well, the question would be, are we talking about, you know, are they wanting to plant annuals or perennials? And that's very, very different. Okay. But in terms of, so you need to be working with cover crop seed companies in your region, okay, that are sourcing seed that works in your region. So, the same species doesn't work everywhere. You need to seek out cultivars or varieties within those species that work where you are located. So that's the first thing, and we can help with that. So feel free to contact us. We know virtually all of the seed companies out there and where they're located in every region and who the good ones are and who the ones that will really work with you are. Secondly, you need to make sure you can't just plant any seed mix. Okay. So don't plant what I call a canned seed mix, a recipe seed mix. Okay. you need a mix, whether it's annual or perennial, that's going to address your context on your farm and address your resource concerns. Otherwise, you could be planting the wrong mix. Don't go by what somebody tells you to plant. If they haven't asked you a single contextual question, you need to run from them because they don't have your best interest at heart. They're just trying to sell you something. Okay. We can help you with that. If you need to know what to plant contextually, that's where we need to talk one-on-one, because we have to glean your context so that we can then make the best recommendations to you.
We're going to take one last question, and I think this is actually a really good one from Taylor. What research do you think is still needed in this area of the connection between soil, animal, and human health, particularly to mobilize policy and systems changes to mobilize us towards regenerative ag? Which I think that's a well done, Taylor. Very good question.
So we just need more of what we're doing, to be honest with you. We're doing the pertinent research now to uncover what we need to. We just need more funding, okay? Because research is very expensive, and especially this phytonutrient research. It is very expensive to do. So we need more research funding allocated, whether that's through the government, whether that's through NGOs, family foundations, whatever. But we need more research funding to be able to continue this research and to continue getting this type of information out to the consumer. Now, relative to influencing policy and all of that, here's the deal. That's going to come through the power of the consumer. Okay. So that means we got to first get this information out to the consumer, and the consumer create the noise. Start saying, hey, we want this type of food produced regeneratively, right? Then that's going to bring influence to bear on our politicians and the decision makers in DC. And that's by far the most effective and efficient way to do it. You're not going to get this done by just simply going to DC and trying to lobby, because there are far more powerful lobbies than us. And let's do it grassroots. Let's work through the consumer who has the voting power. Okay. Make them put pressure on all the politicians and the decision makers. Now we're making progress.
That is so wise. And I think as farmers, especially if we're direct to consumer farmers, we have a large audience. And this happened recently with me. It's happened multiple times with the EATS Act, the Ending Trade Suppression Act, that FACT is against, and I personally am very much against. And I reached out to my newsletter. And I've got people all over the country, but they're mainly in my area because they're mainly people who buy from me. And ASPCA had a national call-in day, and I had about 30 of my customers call in on that call-in day. And that doesn't seem like a lot when you've got, hundreds of people on or thousands of people on your newsletter. I only have hundreds, I don't have thousands, but for those of you who have thousands, it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's 30 more people than would have ever done anything. So you don't realize how much of a say you have, or how much influence you have over your customers, especially if they believe in what you're doing. So
well, here's one thing that everybody needs to know. Okay. If you just go to your local grocery store, if just 8 to 10 of you ask for these types of foods, hey, are you carrying regeneratively produced foods? How are you proving that? And what are you carrying? I want regeneratively produced foods. Okay. That's all it takes. And they're going to start searching. Okay. It doesn't take hundreds to go to that same grocery store, because all of these grocery stores have done their marketing research. They know that if 8 to 10 people ask for something, there are 100 or more, because of all the people that don't bother to say anything, right?
Oh.
So they know that. Their research shows them that. So all it takes is 8 to 10 of you going to each of the major grocery chains and telling them this is what you want. And if you do the same thing in your restaurants, they're going to start requesting these as well from their suppliers, their distributors. So that's all it takes, folks. I'll just make sure you're doing that. You be a part of that change, and you go to your grocery store and your restaurants and you ask for this.
Very wise words. So I have a couple of announcements. We've been doing like this, a very heavy poultry time here. And maybe it's because I've got poultry on my mind because I've got turkeys and broilers coming. But we're going to be doing sliding fences with how to move your poultry without the labor on March 11th with Michael from Three Brothers Farms. And I actually saw his talk, and it was really good at the APA conference. And yeah, for any of you who want to give your birds more room or to roam, or those of you who have tried moving fences, Michael's solution is really, really cool, and I can't wait. I'm going to implement it this year. I'm determined to. And so a sincere thank you to Alan. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you with us. I have a few housekeeping items to share before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar will be available probably by later on this afternoon. That's going to be my goal. And I know I'm going to be going back and rewatching this I'm going to make my husband watch it with me. These documents we archived on our website, and I will, like I said, I'll email them to you. We have some other really great webinars coming up. We are coming to the end of our webinar season, which always makes me really sad. But we've got one more April 18th, which is actually about how two farms in South Carolina changed their farm from a conventional farm to a regenerative farm. And Alan, I don't know if you know Don Jackson or not, but he's an amazing guy, and he and his and Corinne, Don's.
We got Don starting.
Did you get him started?
Yep, we did.
He's an amazing guy. I love that guy. And he's been a mentor for us. He's just phenomenal. Anyway, so he and his mentee, Corinne, are going to talk about what they did. So it'd be a great follow-up to this webinar. So yeah, thank you, everybody. It's been absolutely amazing. I love it hearing Alan talk, and there's always so much to get. I always feel like I think I watched that mRNA webinar like 3 times before I felt like I had a good grasp on it. So I'm going to do the same with this one. So thank you, Alan, and thank you, everybody who showed up today. Goodbye for now.